I want to start this talk by asking you a question. And the question is, I would like you to think about the 5 most important people in your life today. All right. I'm going to give you a second to do that. Now, when you think about these people, I want you to now remove the people in your list that are based on pure circumstances. So people that came into your life because they were convenient, right? So parents, siblings, college friends, work colleagues. Once you take those people out, how many people do you have left? Now, obviously, I can't hear you. I can see you in the chat. But I have asked this question many, many times over the years of many people. And overwhelmingly, the answer for most people is that the majority of their close connections are formed through convenience, right? The truth is, we rarely choose to intentionally connect with people that we don't have a reason to, and I was very much the same way, despite living in more than a dozen cities around the world. I've moved around the world so many times. A lot of the connections I made were very transactional. I didn't think about it that way. I thought I was being friendly and extroverted, but they were. There were people I needed to work with or climb with, or people that I wanted to date. But if you think about it, do you really think that the most important and valuable connections you make only happen between the ages of 18 and 22? Probably not, but we just don't go out and seek new connections because they're really, we're not conditioned to do that, right? And I highlight this because it's really important for us to think about the contrast between a transactional relationship and a relational relationship, right? It's something that has intimacy in it. And I didn't really realize what I was missing out on, why it was so important to have this intimate connections until 4 years ago, when I got into a 3-minute Lyft ride that literally changed my life. So I just arrived from to Los Angeles from Australia. I'm Australian, so there's any Australians there. And I was so excited about being in LA that I bounced into this Lyft ride, and I, after the small talk, I said, hey, tell me about LA. Tell me everything about LA. And my Lyft driver, this really lovely immigrant, after a really long pause, he said, well, actually, it's really lonely. That was the last answer I expected from somebody who was living in a giant city with masses of people, but he had moved from a really close-knit community years ago and, with dreams of wanting to be an entrepreneur. But it felt like I was so surprised by his answer that all I ended up doing was listening. And this 3-minute Lyft ride became an hour-long Lyft ride. And by the end of it, he turned around and he told me that I had changed his life. He said that he'd been feeling lost and I had given him this sense of self and a confidence in himself that he had been missing. And though I had been, I was the one that was giving out the advice and listening. By the time we parted ways, I knew as well that he had left me with something very important. He helped me understand that ultimately what I wanted in life was to help people become better versions of themselves. And the most amazing thing about this encounter, was that I didn't plan it. I didn't expect it. But it really did change my life, because what it taught me was that every single day there are opportunities for growth for ourselves and to connect with amazing people that are available to everywhere, right? If we simply made the decision to engage with it. So that encounter actually inspired me to do a social challenge for myself, which is something that I love doing. I love setting challenges for myself, which is why I love Better Humans. So thanks, Tony, for creating that forum. But the challenge that I had to myself was I had this generous work expense account, and I was going to take that and take Lyfts everywhere in LA. And I would try, whether it was a 3-minute conversation or an hour-long Lyft ride, to create an intimate conversation with every Lyft driver that I came in contact with. And so that was my challenge to myself. By the way, if you guys have a story of your own, I would love to hear about it. Please type it in the chat box. I'll read it at the end, or send me an email. But today, you get to benefit from my over 400 Lyft rides. It's probably a lot more now since I've taken it out of Lyft rides and also taken it to bus stations, cafes, everywhere I am. So, there's a lot of knowledge here. This is a summarized version. There's a much longer one on Medium, but let's get into it. So I would say that for me, and definitely for you as well, probably, one of the hardest things about creating intimacy really, really is breaking the ice. And this obviously in, times like this, it's you can't really get in the Lyft ride all the time, or you can't really go to a cafe all the time. But hopefully the world will return to normal and this will work. So what I want to preface this by saying is that there will definitely be awkward moments. You will definitely be uncomfortable, but I promise you that you will literally not die, which is what I felt like when I first started this. So a trick to break the ice, the hardest part of this, is to ask questions. It sounds really simple, but it's really helpful because you can almost always ask a question at any point. So ask for directions. If you're standing in line at a cafe, ask them for their favorite recommendation for the meal, or you can ask them about, the time, what time the next train is. And the better thing is if you can ask for a favor, or if you can offer them help. So you can say, how can I help you? In my day job, I'm a corporate consultant and I work with distress projects, and 100% of the time, the projects I am in, I work with strangers that I don't know who are already in trouble and already upset. And the simple act of asking, how can I help, or can I help you, is incredible for breaking the ice and creating that space for intimacy. So that's just a reminder that you can, asking questions is a really easy way to break that ice, right? Now, when you ask a question the first time, it's going to be very basic, right? It's going to be something superficial because you've never met this person. The trick from taking it from a superficial conversation into a more intimate conversation is specificity. People love being seen for who they are and how they show up in the world. And they'll always give clues, right? Somebody who spends an hour working on their hair, it's going to be obvious, right? As somebody who wears a jersey about their favorite sports team tells you something about them. My personal favorite is to comment on books. If someone is holding a book they're reading, you can ask them about that. When you notice something about them that's specific, you're telling them that I see you, I'm observing you, and I see you. It's not a line that I'm feeding to you. So once you ask the question and you start a conversation, it gets a little easier, but then you also need to continue the conversation. So the next tip that I have is a little counterintuitive, right? What I always tell people to do is to avoid generic small talk questions. And the reason for that is that, most of us, in fact, all of us, I think, have this preconditioned answer to most of the common questions. If I asked you right now, what do you do for work? You immediately go into this reel. I do that, right? I go, oh, well, this is what I do, who I work for. What that does is remove you from that moment. It takes you from that conversation. It creates that disengagement. So whenever possible, what you want to do is ask a feeling question, right? And what do I mean by that? A feeling question is different from a factual question. So let's take, for example, that you'd approach somebody. In my previous example, I like to ask about books. So you ask this woman, we'll call her Anna for the sake of the question. And so you ask Anna, it's like, hey, what's that book about that you're reading? And Anna goes, well, this is a book about Native folklore that I used to read a lot with my father. And this was, in fact, his copy of the book. At this point, you have a choice, right? She's given you two leads here that you can follow. One is you could ask about Native folklore. So you might be able to say, hey, tell me, what did you learn from this book about Native folklore? The other option is to talk about her father, which should give you an opening to, and you could say something instead like, it sounds like you had a great relationship with your father. That's amazing. And my recommendation would always be to go for the feeling one, right? So go trend towards what is the feeling portion of, whoops, sorry, I just clicked on my notes and they just disappeared. But so my recommendation is to trend towards the feeling side of any opportunity you have, drive towards the feeling side. And you will often find that people will engage in the conversation more when they connect with it emotionally. And that's the same with writing too, right? So one of the interesting things about LA, about trying this experiment in LA, was that I was always worried about who I was going to get. Like I didn't know, in LA, you can get someone who is 3 years old. You can have somebody who is, sorry, not 3. I'm an 18-year-old driver or a 80-year-old driver. You can have someone who, won the visa lottery and is from Ethiopia, or you can get somebody who is, who grew up in East LA. It's really hard to find some basic common ground that you can create conversation with. So I was always afraid that I would not be able to keep, continue the conversation. Yes, Alex, I think I have to have practiced this talk a little bit more. No 3-year-old Uber drivers out there, I agree. But I did always worry about running out of things to say. And here's something that I'm going to tell you that will make you feel a little bit better. And that is that people will lead you where you want to go, where they want to go with the conversation. And all you have to do is ask open-ended questions. So I always, discourage against people saying something like, how's your night going? Because it's always good, or whatever. Or you can say, are you having a good day? It's a yes or no question. So you really want to ask questions like, what's been the best part of your day today? Or, what's your favorite, whatever. So once you ask an open-ended question, you will find that people will be able to take you where they want to go. And all you have to do is listen, right? What we're trying to achieve when you want to create an intimate conversation is you want to invite them to share their story with you. You want to invite them to share their life story with you, not facts about their life, but what's going on internally, right? And then your job is to create a non-judgmental space and to really listen, which we're really not good at, right? Like right now I'm doing all the talking, so you guys are hopefully listening. But to create this non-judgmental space so that they feel comfortable to continue telling the story, right? So if you're worried about running out of things to say, find good questions, and I can give you some examples in my article, and they'll just take you there. So finally, I think, well, not really finally, but the next tip obviously is that connection is a two-way street, right? You need to connect with people and they need to connect with you. They're not connecting with your questions. They're connecting with your story internally. So it is important to share something about yourself. The part that's important, the secret sauce, I call it, about talking about yourself is humility. A lot of times society, conditions us to talk about our achievements, what we're good at. That is extremely disconnecting, so try to keep away from bragging about your life or your, what you've done and what you've achieved, unless it's obviously relevant to the conversation. But it is more important to share your flaws or your struggles or things that you resonate with and parts of their story that you have in common. And that is a much better way to create connection than bragging about your latest achievement. Although if you have something to celebrate, that's always fantastic too. And the last thing I would like to say in terms of moving away from that connection, before you leave somebody, if you can, what you want to do is to create let me rephrase this. You want to help them see themselves in a different light, in a better light, right? Years ago when I was, so I've been an immigrant twice over, and lived in a lot of places. And I think the first time I left home, I was 17 years old. And I'd arrived somewhere and I was, really struggling to adapt to this new country because there were so many different rules and so many different things. And I was telling this woman about it. And she said to me that I was incredibly brave. And in that moment, my perception of myself changed from being this person who was just struggling, who didn't know what she was doing, to somebody who was incredibly brave, who had left home and could at least attempted to, establish a life somewhere on my own. And that moment stays with me today. And that version of her story about me stays with me today. So today, when I struggle, I can think, well, I'm trying to be brave, So Maya Angelou has this amazing quote that she says, people will forget what you said and they will forget what you did. But what they will never forget is how you made them feel. And I think this is true every single time. If you can leave every one of these conversations by helping that person that you were talking to see themselves in a different and better light, they will remember you and you will have made a difference in their day. So again, I'm going to do a quick recap of this, of the notes, of the tips, because this is there's a very long version of this. But ask questions, right, to break the ice. Make it specific. Follow up with feeling questions. At all costs, avoid small talk. Ask open-ended questions and let them lead you while really listening to them. Share something about yourself, but avoid bragging about your achievements. And then in the end, help them see themselves in a better light. There is really nothing special about these tips, I think. But there was an internal switch in my mind when these started to really become something that was an effective tool. And what I realized after a lot of reflection is that the switch is in myself was to have no expectations. It sounds funny because, the reality is that our society does not condition us to create random, intimate conversations with strangers, right? We tend to want to create intimacy with people when they fulfill a purpose for us. So when they can be our potential partners or when they can be our potential collaborators. But these predefined roles that we have, they have predefined expectations. We want people to behave a certain way. So we forget to stay curious and allow interactions to play out naturally and to really get to know people. So the gap between what we expect from somebody and how they fulfill this role is really what I think creates the gap for intimacy. So if you can approach these tips and add that little extra where you create no expectations and you just stay curious, then you're doing great. So you're probably sitting here thinking, I've shared this story with a lot of my friends and most of them are convinced, they're excited to try it out, but they're like, well, I have a life, I have my friends, my social needs are met. I'm really kind of comfortable. I don't really want to go through all the trouble of creating intimacy with strangers, with people I might never talk to again. I get it. I've been like that for a long time. But if that is you, I'd like to share this final story about my friend, Phoebe. So I met Phoebe when she was 19 years old and she just finished a trip, a long backpacking trip. And she had an amazing journey and she was on her way home and it was the final flight. And she had to catch this 11-hour flight back to Israel. She was standing there when she realized that she had overstayed her visa and she didn't have the money to pay the fine to leave. And so she tearfully begged this very unsympathetic customs officer to please let her get on this flight to go home. But he was very strict on the rules. But as she was standing in line, this couple behind her heard her story and offered to pay the entire $200 fine. And even though she offered to pay them back and get their details, they refused. And they just said, you know what, it's okay. We just want to make sure you get home. We have a daughter about your age and we would hate to see her in your position. And so she gets on this flight. And as she boards the flight, she tells me this really vividly because she remembers the last available seat to her was between these two extremely intimidating men. And they looked really grumpy. But so she sat down and, you know, she also realized as she sat down that she had no money and it was going to be an 11-hour flight and she had no food. But sometime in the course of this flight, these two intimidating men realized that she had no money and bought her a meal. And they began chatting with her. And by the end of this flight, all these strangers had completely replenished her faith in humanity. This flight had convinced her of that way more than the entire year of traveling that she had done. But here's the point, right? 11 years later, there are dozens and dozens of flights that she's taken. But this will be the one that she remembers. The ones where the strangers came into her life and made her life richer by sharing kindness and joy. And these are people that she would have never chosen to speak to. She would have never chosen to talk to. But here we are, right? And I truly believe that after years of talking to people and interacting, and now in lockdown, thank you, Hassan. Yeah, I feel that too with talking to people from all over the world. And some of my medium friends are here. Hi, Q. So, you know, it is, after all of these years of doing this, I really, really believe that something magical happens in your world, in the way that you see the world, in your way that you approach the world, when you see it as a place filled with opportunity for unexpected joy and new experiences. No matter how bad my life is going, I always think it can change in an instant. You know, some stranger can come into my life, or not even I can reach out to some stranger and change their life. But these are the moments that really make up this thing we call life, I think. You know, when we look back on our lives, we're not going to remember the 10 millionth cup of coffee that we made, or the, you know, 1,000th load of laundry that we did. But we will remember these moments where strangers came into our life and made it richer, where these connections happened, online or otherwise. Thank you, Anasha. I so appreciate hearing feedback, especially from you. I really, you know, I'm such a fan of yours. So I want to leave you with this. Here is my challenge to you today, even though it is very uncomfortable and it is a struggle and I have days when I don't want to do it. I want you to take the chance to reach out to a stranger and create this magic for yourself. See what life can take you, where life can take you if you simply allow that opportunity to occur. You can even start with me. I would love to hear from you. I'm going to put this somewhere in here in this chat, but you know, if not, look for me in Medium, and all my contact details are there as well. And I think that I'm exactly 3 minutes out. So let's do a Q&A if you guys have some feedback. And I'm going to type my thing. Let's see. Thank you all so much for turning up and for responding to my session. Please write to me with your own stories. I would also love to hear about what you struggle with in trying to connect with people, whether people that already exist in your life or people or new people. And I would love to help you and chat through how I went through some of these issues as well. Thank you, Tony, if you're still on this call, so much for everything that you've created and for allowing me to be part of this. Let's see. Oh, I had a call for action somewhere, but that's my email in the chat box. And I think Tony's going to help us email everybody else about this. But yeah, I hope to hear from you guys soon from all over the world, whether it's from my writing or on email. Thank you.